Have you ever loved someone so deeply that you would give up the most powerful part of yourself just to stay in their world? This is the story of a goddess cursed to live as a mortal, ancient, powerful, and completely alone, until one ordinary man becomes the first person in her entire existence who looks at her without fear. She can split storms and shatter glass with a word, but the one thing she can't control is what happens when someone finally chooses to stay anyway. Watch until the end, because the sacrifice she makes in the final act is the kind of choice that will live in your chest long after this video is over. Let me tell you about a goddess. Not the kind in textbooks. Not marble statues and olive branches. Not the sanitized, convenient version that humans have spent centuries making palatable. I mean the real thing. Something vast. Something old. Something that once whispered to the ocean and watched it obey. Her name, her real name, is something your tongue wasn't built to say. It lives somewhere between the sound of a tide retreating and the last exhale of a dying star. But we'll call her Aria. Because that's the name she chose when they sent her here. When the Council of Gods, or what passes for gods in the age where nobody prays anymore, decided that she had committed an unforgivable act. She had loved a mortal man. His name was Elias. He was a poet, which should have been her first warning. Poets have always been dangerously good at seeing things that aren't meant to be seen. He looked at her one evening, just looked, the way only certain humans can, and said, "You move like you're remembering somewhere you used to live." And Aria, who had watched the birth of mountains, who had held lightning in her palms and called it ordinary, Aria, who had never once been seen. She felt something crack open inside her chest. Something that felt absurdly, terrifyingly human. She stayed too long. She loved too openly. And when they found out, when the divine order that keeps the universe stitched together decided that a goddess bleeding emotion was a structural problem, they made a decision. They didn't destroy her. That would have been kinder. They cursed her. She would live among humans, indefinitely, subject to their smallness, their noise, their beautiful, exhausting, temporary lives. She would feel everything they feel, hunger, loneliness, the ache of 3 a.m., but retain just enough of herself to know exactly what she had lost. And Elias. His memory was taken. Clean. Surgical. Like a page torn from a book. He woke up one morning and the space where she had been was simply empty. Not painful. Not even noticeable. She got to remember everything. He got to be free. 3 years into her sentence, and she had stopped calling it that, mostly, Aria lived in a 4th-floor apartment on Meridian Street, in a city that didn't deserve the name it had given itself. She worked at a bookstore. Of course she did. Humans wrote books about her, she discovered. Not about her specifically, but about things like her. Myths. Legends. Gods and monsters and women who were both. She'd read every single one. Most of them got it wrong. The hardest part wasn't the cold, or the noise, or the relentless, grinding smallness of human time. The hardest part was the powers. She still had them. Muted, like a song playing from a room away. But present. When she was angry, electronics nearby would crash. When she was sad, it would rain, not just drizzle, but the kind of rain that makes you feel like the sky is grieving. When she was startled, the lights would surge. One time, in a grocery store, a man reached past her too quickly for a box of cereal and every light in the building blew out simultaneously. She left her cart and walked home in the dark. She had stopped apologizing for the strangeness. Apologies required explanations. And explanations were the one luxury she absolutely could not afford. Loneliness, she had discovered, was not the same as being alone. She had been alone before. Vast, powerful, infinite solitude, that was just what divinity felt like. But loneliness, that was something else. Loneliness had weight. It pressed against the inside of your ribs. It made you check your phone not because you expected a message, but just to have something to hold. It made you watch couples on park benches the way you watch sunsets. Like something beautiful happening to someone else. She had not made friends. She had tried, once. But the girls at work would ask questions. Where are you from? Do you have family? Why do you never seem cold? And Aria's answers were either too vague to satisfy or far, far too honest. She had told one woman the truth, once. Just to see. The woman laughed. Aria laughed too. And somehow that was worse than disbelief. His name was Daniel Voss. He was not remarkable in any way that would make sense on paper. He was 31, a structural engineer. He read the same 3 books on rotation. He made his coffee too strong and his apologies not strong enough. He had kind eyes and the permanent look of someone doing complicated math in the back of their head. He walked into the bookstore on a Tuesday because he'd left his umbrella somewhere on Monday and had given up caring. He didn't stare at her the way most people did. Most people stared at Arya the way you stare at a word you've seen 1,000 times but suddenly can't read. Something in her face made people search. For what? They couldn't say. Daniel just looked. The way you look at something you find genuinely interesting. Not unsettling. Not threatening. Interesting. He asked her where the architecture section was. She told him. He said thank you. And that was all. He came back on Thursday. And then the Thursday after that. And the one after that. He always bought something. Usually something obscure, the kind of books that had been sitting on the shelf so long they'd started to feel like furniture. He'd examine them like he was making a very serious decision. He'd pay. He'd leave. He never lingered. He never pushed. Arya noticed that nothing broke when he was around. The lights held steady. The air didn't shift. Her hands didn't hum. She didn't know what that meant. She told herself it meant nothing. The first real conversation happened because of a storm. Arya's storm, specifically. She hadn't meant it. She'd gotten a letter that morning, or what passed for a letter from the divine realm, a cold, formal reminder that her sentence had no defined end. That there was no appeal. That her existence here was not a mistake to be corrected. It was a punishment to be endured. By noon, the city was drowning. Daniel came in at 12:15, shaking water from his jacket with the resigned air of someone who had long since made peace with being inconvenienced. He looked at the wall of rain outside, then at Arya, then back at the rain. He said, "Did you do something to upset the weather?" She looked at him. He looked back. Easy, unbothered. Joking. He was joking. She laughed. It surprised them both. He asked her how long she'd worked there. She said, "A few years." He asked where she was from. She said, "Far away." He nodded, like this was a perfectly reasonable answer. Most people pushed. He just nodded. She found herself studying him the way she had once studied maps of the ancient world, looking for something she recognized. Something that told her where she was. He asked what her favorite book in the store was. She pointed to a thin, battered volume on the end of the poetry shelf. "Neruda," he said. He understood love as a kind of homesickness, she said. Missing someone not because they're gone, but because you can feel that they will be. Daniel looked at her in a way that was different from before. Still not afraid. But quieter, like he'd heard something he needed to think about. He left when the sun came back. He said, "Same time next Thursday." She didn't answer. He came back anyway. There is a particular kind of falling that happens slowly. Not a plunge. Not a sweep you off your feet moment. Just a gradual, quiet tilting, like a compass needle that has found north and stopped pretending it could point anywhere else. He brought her coffee one morning. Too strong. Just the way she'd somehow mentioned she liked it 3 weeks earlier, in passing, not even as a preference, just as a fact. He'd remembered. She held the cup for a long time after he left. She told him things. Not the real things, but true things. That she found human music strange, the way it could physically move people. That she sometimes couldn't sleep because the city was too loud and too quiet at the same time. That she had never felt truly cold until she lived somewhere that expected her to. He listened the way very few people listen. Like what you were saying was the most interesting thing he'd heard all day, and he'd had an interesting day. She was careful. She was always careful. She made sure the lights didn't surge when he touched her hand, once, briefly, when they were reaching for the same book. She made sure the weather was neutral. Controllably, deliberately neutral. She made sure her eyes stayed the right color. Most of the time. He told her about his mother, who had believed, genuinely and completely, that the world was full of things that chose not to be seen. Who left offerings on her windowsill every full moon. Who told Daniel once that the most important thing in life was to practice being unafraid. Did it work? Arya asked. I'm sitting here with you, aren't I? He said. She didn't know what to do with that. So she did nothing, which was the most human thing she had ever done. It happened on a night in November. Arya was walking home from the store. It was late. The street was empty. And then it wasn't. 3 men. A woman ahead of her on the sidewalk. A scenario that Arya recognized with the cold clarity of someone who had watched human darkness for 3 years and felt helpless against every instance of it. Except tonight, she wasn't paying attention to her own rules. She didn't think. She simply stepped forward. And she spoke. Not in the language she used at the bookstore. Not in the voice she had carefully practiced to sound warm and human and unremarkable. In the voice she had been born with. The men froze. The woman ran. The streetlights around her blazed white-hot, then shattered, one by one, down the block. The air around her moved like something breathing. And when she turned around, Daniel was standing at the end of the street. He had been walking home from a late meeting. He had turned the corner at exactly the wrong moment. Or the right one. Depending on what happened next. She waited for him to run. She had a whole script prepared for this. Had rehearsed it in the quiet of her apartment on all the nights she couldn't sleep. I can explain. Or, you didn't see what you think you saw. Or, simpler, please don't be afraid. He walked toward her. Beat. Slowly. Deliberately. The way you approach something you've already decided not to be afraid of. He stopped 2 feet away. Looked at her eyes. The wrong color, luminous, ancient. Looked at the glass around her. Looked at her face. He said, "Are you okay?" Not, "What are you?" Not, "What happened?" "Are you okay?" And Arya, who had watched the birth of oceans, who had held stars like loose change, who had survived the death of empires and the slow, grinding weight of 3 years of ordinary human loneliness, did not have an answer. She told him everything. Not all at once. Not easily. It came out in pieces, the way the truth usually does. Sideways, when she wasn't looking directly at it. About what she was. About Elias. About the curse. About the rain. About the way she had spent 3 years practicing being smaller than she was. He didn't interrupt. He didn't pace. He didn't do any of the things she had imagined. He just listened. And when she was done, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Is it exhausting? Being that careful all the time?" Beat. She looked at him. "Yes," she said. "Then stop," he said. "At least in here. At least with me." She wanted to tell him that he didn't understand what he was asking. That proximity to something divine was not a gentle thing. That Elias, the first one, the poet, had loved her genuinely and it had cost him the memory of her. That she was not safe to love. She wanted to say all of that. Instead she said, "You should be afraid of me." He said, "I know, but I'm more afraid of watching you disappear back into being nothing when you're standing right in front of me." They did not fall in love the way it happens in stories. There was no single moment, no declaration, no soundtrack swell. It was quieter than that. More like recognizing something. Like remembering a word in a language you thought you'd forgotten. She let him see her eyes as they actually were. He didn't flinch. She let the rain be what it was, responsive to her, alive with her, strange. He started keeping an umbrella at her place. It was the most romantic thing that had ever happened to her. In a universe of billions of years. The divine didn't send letters about it. They sent signs. The way they always had, indirectly, inefficiently, with a particular cruelty of powers that preferred not to have to explain themselves. A mirror that showed her something that wasn't there. A dream of open sky that felt like a summons. The sound of her real name, not Arya, the other one, echoing in the walls of her apartment at 4 a.m. They knew. Of course they knew. She had broken the terms of her sentence. Not by having powers. Not by existing. But by the one thing the curse was designed to prevent. She had been loved. And she had let herself love back. The terms were simple. And terrible. She could remain as she was, cursed, human adjacent, alive, but with Daniel's memory taken. Clean. the same way Elias had been cleaned. Or she could sacrifice the last anchor of her divinity, the thin thread of power she still possessed, and become fully mortal. Subject to time, to aging, to death. In exchange for keeping what they had. Fully human. Fully hers. Fully temporary. She spent a week not deciding. She watched him in the way she had learned to watch things she loved. The way you look at something when you've started doing math in the back of your head about how long it can last. He noticed she was quieter. He didn't push. He left soup at her door once. She didn't ask how he knew she was sad. The morning she decided, it was raining. Not her rain. Just rain. The ordinary kind. She thought about Elias. The poet who had loved her and had the love surgically removed like something benign. He was fine, somewhere, living a full life without a scar he'd never know to look for. She thought about the girl she had been, if goddess could be girl, before the sentence. All that power, all that vastness, all that magnificent, echoing solitude. And she thought about a man who kept an umbrella at her apartment, who asked her if she was okay before he asked what she was, who sat beside her in the dark and didn't need the lights to know where she was. She made her choice. They don't make a monument of it in the old stories. The goddess who chose mortality. Mostly because it's a small story, from a certain angle. A woman waking up. A cup of coffee. A man who sleeps like someone who has decided, on some instinctual level, that the world is going to be fine. But Arya, just Arya now, nothing more, nothing older, lay there in the ordinary morning light and took inventory. No hum in her hands. No weather responding to her moods. No thin thread of something ancient running under her skin like a river. Gone. All of it, gone. She waited for grief. It came. Of course it did. She had given up something that 10,000 human lifetimes couldn't replace. Something real and original and utterly unrepeatable. She let herself feel it. She did not perform bravery. He didn't know what she had given up. She hadn't told him about the terms, about the choice. She had made it alone, the way she had made every decision for 3 years. Quietly, in the space between who she was and who she had to be. Maybe she would tell him someday. Maybe she would let him carry some of it. That, too, she was still learning. The practice of not being alone in a thing. She made coffee. She made it too strong. He drank it without complaint, the way he always did. Outside, it was raining. She didn't look up to check if it was hers. It wasn't. It was just rain. Something genuinely aching here. She found she didn't mind. There are stories that end with restoration. The hero reclaims what was lost. The curse is broken. The divine order reversed. The goddess takes her seat back among the stars. This isn't that story. This is the other one. The one where what was lost stays lost. But what was found stays too. Arya, who had once been vast and old and powerful, set her coffee cup on the windowsill. Watched the city move through the glass. Felt the ordinary weight of a morning with nothing miraculous in it. And for the first time in a very long time. In a very long, lonely, ancient time. She felt like herself. They say that when gods choose mortality, the universe registers it somewhere, some deep record of the impossible made ordinary. I don't know if that's true. But I know this. There is no kind of courage more ancient than choosing to be small for the right reasons. And no kind of love more powerful than the one that makes something infinite decide that finite is enough. If you found something true in this story, something that felt like a thing you'd been carrying without a name for it, then you already know what this story was really about. It wasn't about gods. It was about you.